Today, talking about thoughts and emotions. I would like to introduce him formally by saying that he has begun his journey in Spiritism since 1990. As a serious researcher on the scientific aspect of Spiritism, Luiz has been facilitating the studies of how to bridge science and Spiritism in both languages, Portuguese and English. Mr. Lima is a renowned lecturer in the Spiritist movement and participates in local and national seminars and events all year round. Luiz Lima holds a degree in electronic engineering and he works in the computer network industry. And today, as we have already mentioned, an amazing topic talking about thoughts and emotions. Luis, it's all on you right now. Thank you so much for your time again. And we will be making some questions and comments towards the end. So please share with us this moment. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leo. Yeah, questions. We all have questions, myself included. This is, for me personally, it was one of the, maybe the first topic when I started in Spiritism that I really had to stop and think. And I said, no, this is very serious. I need to, this is a personal thing. I need to understand this in details. And I'm going to trail whatever it takes to get to understand thoughts and emotions. It was one of my first studies in Spiritism. And then, of course, from then on, we just, study more, read more, and know more about it. So I think it's a fascinating topic. There are several different ways to approach the subject. Of course, thoughts and emotions, it's a vast, vast subject. The Spiritist literature is full of information about it, especially André Luiz has a full collection of books. They all talk about thoughts and emotions in a way or another, so it's a vast subject. So what we are going to do here is we're going to take a scientific view, a detailed scientific view on how thoughts are created and propagated and what emotions have to do with that. So we're going to divide our talk today in three parts. First part, how thoughts are formed, actually formed. How are they formed? Number two, how are they propagated? How they go, out there. And number three, the impact of these thoughts and emotions, not only on people, but on us, on ourselves. Our thoughts impact us in certain ways, our emotions too. So we're going to take a look at this today. And we're going to start from formation of thoughts. Mostly this information is here in this book, The Mechanics of Mediumship. There's a little bit here on evolution in two worlds, but mostly it's the mechanics of mediumship. And I also use this other book here by Dr. Marlene Mowbray, The Soul of Matter. So let's go. Formation of thoughts. We need to start from the very beginning because our thoughts depend, or they are, they become live on top of the thoughts of the Creator. So we need to understand how it happens. We're going to go back to question number 1 of the Spirit's book. This particular slide that I'm going to show you, we could take a long time explaining, but that's not the point today. The point today is just to have an overview, a general idea of what's matter, what's thought. That's all it is today. So we're going to go a little superficial on this slide here, but from God, 2 things emanate. And that's on the Spirit's book, by the way, right? Spiritual principle is one of them, and the other one is the universal cosmic fluid. Within the universal cosmic fluid, we have all the seeds for everything that one day is going to be matter of any form. And that is called the material principle. So from here, we have 2 sides per se, spiritual principle and material principle. The spiritual principle starts the journey as simple and ignorant. The entire creation happens because both of them interact. The spiritual principle interact with the material principle and starts forming things. Very simple in the beginning, more complex as it goes along, and much more complex later on. But you will start from the get-go. At one point, it becomes so much more developed than from the initial point that we name it differently. We name it intelligent principle. This happens, the transition of these, this is just a name, but the transition happens when the spiritual principle is so advanced that it now can create lives. It can insert life into inert matter. That's when we uh, kind of give them a certificate, a graduation or something, and we call them intelligent principle, which is going to go along. It's going to, then intelligent principle entails into there's life, it's related to life. So it goes through the entire plants kingdom, the entire animal kingdom, all of those, and then it graduates again, if you will, and we give it another name. It's called spirit. It graduates when it is so developed that it can sustain individualities. Spirits are individuals. One spirit has nothing to do with the other. So that's how the whole thing lays out here. And we need to start taking conclusions here because, first of all, between the left side, okay, what I call the left side is spiritual principle, intelligent principle, and spirit. And the right side is the material principle. Between the two sides, there is no connection point. They are completely independent, no connection points. So that's going to be important because then what happens is if we take out what we don't need, if we clean up a little bit the slide, we have God presiding over everything, the spirit, and the material principle. This in Spiritism is called the Universal Trinity. And this is explained in question 27 of the Spirit's book. So we have three things that are completely independent. So spirit is completely independent of the material principle or matter. So what is intelligent is on the left side, if you remember the image, and it has nothing to do with anything material. The spirit is the intelligence. Anything else that the spirit does, any action it takes, it depends on using the material principle. That includes creating thoughts. Thought is a creation of the spirit. If it's a creation, it needs material principle of some form. It might not be very intuitive for us because it's not a solid matter as we know, but it has to use the material principle of some form. Emotions, on the other side, do not require the use of the material principle. Emotions are things that are connected or related to, even better, related to the left side only. Emotions do not tie into anything material, any form of matter, nothing. So that's the first difference. So thoughts will be created because the spirit is feeling something. It's the sentiment, is the emotion. So thoughts become more as a consequence of the spirit being, feeling something. This has to be very clear because thought in this way, André Luiz is very clear about this. He says, thought is still matter, not in the sense of a chair, of something that we physically can touch, but it still matter because it needs the material principle. So let's take a look at this material principle a little bit closer. Let's take a closer look at this thing. We're going to divide this in two because the material principle related to planet Earth, it is different for other planets because what we have here is not the actual universal cosmic fluid. It's a transformation of it. I personally call this the planetary fluid, which is different from Jupiter, Venus, and so. So the planetary fluid for the planet Earth has, of course, material principle, has matter, but matter in two types. One is called ponderable matter, something that we can physically see. It's also called in the books physical matter. And the other is imponderable matter, something that the books are going to call mental matter. And these are different things. They are not the same. There's no interaction. It's either or. We need to make sure we understand this. How do I perceive physically incarnated here on earth? How do I perceive both? We perceive ponderable matter with our five senses. Right? Our five senses. That's how we perceive ponderable matter. Taste, smell, touch, hearing, sight. We perceive imponderable matter through our vital centers, also called chakras. So you see, we use different resources to be able to understand, to be able to acquire information, per se, from one side or the other. And the resources are not the same. So André Luiz is going to tell us this. We know a lot because science brings this to us, right? By the way, as spiritists, we never go to the lab to make experiments and experiences, and we never do this. We use the information that comes from science. So science tells us that, matter is formed of particles. Here are some of them. I'm listing some of them. Atoms, which are actually formed by protons, neutrons, and electrons, but there's more, positrons, photons, there's several of them. I'm listing just a few here. So these are elements, these are even better. These are particles that we know, and we know a lot by now. Technology is up to a point where we have a lot more understanding than if you go back in time, only 30 or 40 years ago. It's a tremendous leap that we were able to achieve in terms of knowledge. And André Luiz is going to say, on the imponderable matter, I cannot give you any names because you don't have vocabulary for it, because you don't know this thing. Okay? For example, if I show you this here, which is a pen, if you never saw this before, you don't have a name for it. We're going to have to create a name. And I say, oh, the first time I see this thing, I'm going to name it pen. Okay. That's the convention. From now on, we call something like that a pen. But we have to know what it is first to give it a name. Anything on the imponderable matter side of the screen, anything mental matter, we don't have names. So André Luiz says, I have to refer to these things using a name. So I'm going to create my own names. And he asks permission for us to accept his names. He puts the word mental in front of all the names that we know from physics. So now we have mental atoms, mental nucleoprotons, and so on and so on and so. And he goes further. He will say, on the left side, all these particles, there's a law that is on top of everything. And that is studied it's the quantum law, the law of the quanta, quantum physics, quantum mechanics. That's what they study. And he will say, on the right side is exactly the same thing. The same laws apply, which is very interesting. So still, imponderable matter, what happens in the imponderable matter world, we can put it this way, still follows the same laws of quantum physics. This is very interesting. Okay, so what happens, we spoke about this, right? Thought is matter, but it's not matter ponderable, it's matter imponderable. So how do we create these thoughts? So we are going to refer to an atom, which is one of the basic, it's not the first basic particle anymore. You see, the atom until not too long ago was the minimum particle. Now it's a giant thing because of all the discoveries that we have achieved in science. But I'm going to start from the atom. He will say this: to create anything physical realm, physical world, we use atoms. We combine atoms forming molecules, combine molecules forming minerals, and so and so. It is the same thing under the imponderable matter. So we are going to combine mental atoms, mental protons, mental neutrons, all of those things that you see here written on the screen. And thought is going to use this. formation of thought is going to use mental atoms in three different ways. In three different ways. It can use the atom all together as a whole. It can use just the nuclei, or it can use just the electrons. This is very interesting. It's very deep, though. It's very deep. It's a very deep scientific piece of information. It's just on the imponderable side. And the thought formed by using atoms, nucleus, or electrons is going to generate different thoughts. Is going to generate different things. So let's go through this a little bit. When I tell you something, or if I show you something, if I show you a book here, for example, you can see because you're using your five senses. Imponderable matter is not this way. So when the thought is formed, when the spirit starts working with the atomic levels or particles or atom itself to form something, there's something material being formed, but we can't see with our eyes, we can't feel, we cannot detect with our five senses. And it generates something that is called thought form. Thought form. Thought form would be equivalent of me showing you a book. It's just that I'm not showing, I'm thinking. And it's being captured within the spirit world. They are capturing. So when I tell you something and I think another thing, they don't care for what I say. They care for what I'm thinking, because that's what they capture. So thought form is the initial formation of thoughts, is the presentation form of a thought. And then this could be, you see, this is a scientific study. Scientific studies have no moral component. It's out of the picture. Science does not touch moral. So my thought could be a good thing, like you see in the little image here, or it could be a bad thing. It doesn't matter. The structure of the thought is the same. I'm dealing with atoms, electrons, nucleus of atoms. It is the same mechanics, regardless of the direction, the energy, the charge, positive or negative, that I'm putting on this thing. So the thought form is what the spirits are going to capture from what we think. That's communication. That's how communication happens in the spirit world. And he goes further, even more. He will say this: when the spirit uses the entire atom to create thoughts, it's going to create thoughts that are very long waves. We're going to explain waves in a little bit. So it creates thoughts that are very basic. They just keep us going. That's for maintenance of body heat. It's everything that is already automated in the perispirit. It's not creating anything major. It's not making nothing. It's very basic when it uses the entire atom. When the spirit uses the electrons, it moves the electrons. It generates another type of wave. Like I said, we're going to talk about waves shortly. This is where the spirit is a little bit more committed in creating the thought. It's above the basic level. So we do this. The spirit uses electrons to create thought forms when he's in a reflection state, meditation, prayer. So you kind of, if you will, you elevate yourself a little bit based from the basic, heart beating and digestion and all of that. You elevate yourself a little bit more concentration, a little bit more of interest. This produces inner light. That's interesting, very interesting. And when the spirit is able to use the nucleus of the atom, okay, the very most important part of the atom, you will create other things, much more strong emotions, unspeakable pain if he's feeling pain, afflictive prayer, which is that prayer that you really put yourself into. You want help, you need to be helping, or you need to send a prayer to somebody else, and you concentrate, you put all your concentration in there, you put all your efforts into that prayer. That's what this is going to do. And this creates a transformative power within myself. Even if I'm doing, say, a prayer to somebody else, trying to help somebody else, but you have to be fully committed to this. It's the third level. So there are 3 levels: thoughts that are very basic, thoughts that are a little bit more elevated, and thoughts that are really, really, really elevated. And they all happen because the spirit has to use the material principle to be able to create the thought form. That's how it is formed. Once the thought is formed, it has to be propagated. Now we're going to talk about those waves that I said a little bit ago. So the thought is now created. So it's kind of, here's my book, okay? Now I need to send this image to other people. I need to propagate this image. How does it happen? It's also very interesting. Like I said in the very beginning, us creating thoughts depend on the creator's thought. We co-create thoughts. Co-create means there's somebody else with us. That somebody else is God. We take the basic creator's thought and modify it the way we explain, by changing the atoms and everything else. For that, again, I need the material principle. So here is creator's thought. So that's us. So I'm going to think of something. And you already know there are at least 3 ways that we can do this thing. And the thought is going to propagate differently. The 3 types of thought that I'm able to generate are going to propagate differently. So the propagation is a spectrum. You propagate more or you propagate less your thought. We're going to explain in details here. So we need to study a little bit, 1 minute or maybe 2 minutes, study of waves. Okay, what is a wave? So think of a string. Okay, attach one end of the string to the wall. On the other end, you just do like this, up and down. It generates a wave just like you see in green on your screen here. If you do this very slowly, you have a type of wave. If you do this very, very, very fast, you have a different type of wave. So you can have a wave that is a green style or the yellow style, and just by looking at them, they are different. Okay. To compare two waves, what we do is we measure the distance between 2 peaks. That's called wavelength. So you see the wavelength, just by looking at the picture, the wavelength of the green wave is longer than the wavelength of the yellow wave. So these waves are different. We can look and see, and technically they are different because the wavelengths are different. Well, the green wave is called long wave. Long because the wavelength is long compared to the other one. The other one is called a short wave because the wavelength is short. That's why they have these names: long waves, short waves. What is the difference? I don't know if you, maybe that tells us how old we are, but that's okay. I don't care, no problem. In the early 70s, at the time I was living in Brazil, and I discovered something that was, it just opened my mind. Discovered something called shortwave radio. It's a little tiny thing. We didn't have FM radio at the time yet. It was coming up. We had AM radio, and I found this shortwave radio, and I said, what is this? So nobody could explain really what it was. And I said, oh, let me try this. So I turned it on, and there's a knob that you can change stations. The stations that I was picking up, and I was in Brazil, like I said, South America, the stations were from France, in French, and some of the languages I couldn't understand. Uh, we used to get from England, from Germany, from Denmark, and I said, "How come I'm picking up these things?" And then I said, "I need to understand this." So I went after an explanation. They explained to me, these are short waves. When the station transmits those, they do not use the regular AM radio, because AM radio, the reach, the range is very poor. Shortwave ranges will make halfway through the world. And I said, wow, that's a lot of impact that the wave has. So the same thing here. The long wave has a limited effect, as a shorter range. It doesn't go too far. The short wave is very, very, very powerful, very long range. Like I said, the shortwave radio, I was picking up stations from Europe and Brazil. So that's the difference between a long wave and a short wave. So thought is matter, as we spoke, right? But they propagate in waves. So you generate the thought and you propagate it. They are propagated according to the wave. So you can generate thoughts that will use long waves to propagate. Some others will use short waves to propagate. Some others will use something in the middle we call mid wave, right? That's the idea behind waves. Let's go back to what we were saying. So creator's thoughts. So the waves, here you have a representation of something starting on the left side with a very short wave, and it changes around, it changes along. If you go to the right side, it becomes longer and longer and longer until you have a very long wave. Because our thoughts are like this. Sometimes we are very concentrated on one thing. The next minute, the next second maybe, we are more relaxed. Then we think again, very concentrated, then we are more relaxed. It's a dynamic process. That's how we are. That's how we produce thought, because that's how we use our emotions to generate thoughts. So here you have a visual, I would say, image, right? An image showing waves. So on the left side, these very short waves are called ultra short. You and I, we are not able to generate ultra short waves. This is only ability acquired by the spirits that belong to angelical legions. That's Jesus. That's not you and I. We can't do this. Ultra short waves. On the other side, contrary to the ultra short waves, the longest possible wave is so long that it kind of breaks, it kind of chops. It's called fragmentary wave. That is for the animals. They have fragmentary thoughts. They don't have continuous thinking processes. Fragmentary wave. That's not for us either. We are in between. We are between fragmentary waves and ultra short waves. And André Luiz comes to explain to us. We are able to generate 3 types of wave: short, medium, and long. And they relate directly to what we just saw. Long waves are thoughts that have to do with upkeeping individuality. It's just very basic, nothing major. You're not putting a lot of effort. You're just thinking. It usually relates to everything that is already automated into the perispirit. For example, when you go to first learn how to drive a car, just think about, go back in time, right? Your very first time in a car. We are like, oh my God, what can I do? Usually most of us, right? Very nervous, very, you don't want anybody talking to you. You don't want to look at anything. You don't want the radio on, nothing like this. You have to put a tremendous amount of concentration to be able to, to do your first maybe mile or so. And then you keep learning and learning. And today, right, you're driving and talking on the cell phone and talking to the person, on your side, and looking at the mirrors on the car. It's a process that has been automated. That is a kind of long wave. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to stop everything because I'm driving. We don't need to do this. The amount of concentration, this is an analogy, right? The amount of concentration to drive a car is minimum today because we do it for so many years, so long, and it becomes automated. And that happens when the spirit uses the whole atom. Remember, we saw that whole atom. Now, we have medium waves. We are able to generate thoughts that will propagate using medium waves. Again, those are reflection, meditation, natural prayer, something like that. You have a little bit more concentration. It's not automated. You have to stop and do it, but you don't have to. You don't have to concentrate so deeply and forget about the world. No, you can be in the middle of your day. You can be, for example, cooking or driving, and let me think of somebody. He's in a hospital. Let me just. It's a quick, natural prayer. Those are medium waves, and the spirit uses the electrons to do that. And short waves are the ones that have extremely strong emotions. They are attached to extremely strong emotions. It requires a lot of concentration. It requires you to be really concentrated on what you're doing. And that is created when the spirit uses the nucleus of the mental atom. So this picture here that you see ties in with the other one on how the spirit uses the mental particles to generate thought. And all of in dealing with mental particles is subject to the same laws of quantum physics that we know in the ponderable world. It is the same, which makes it easier for us to understand. That kind of information that we're putting here, which comes from the book, Mechanics of Mediumship, that doesn't come from science, but everything else works exactly as science tells us. And we are advancing tremendously, almost every week, tremendously in the studies of quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and anything that goes with that. Those are beautiful studies, very deep. But, when you attach what they have discovered, what science brings to this, it kind of, at least for me, it opens up the mind and say, wow, now I understand what's happening. So, for example, when we go to a Spiritist center on a lecture or some sort of study or treatment, whatever, if you really make use of the physical location, because it's a location that doesn't have noise, doesn't have distractions, supposedly. So we can really use those minutes, those hours in favor of ourselves. We can really bring out our strong emotions and make it happen. That's the transformative power, as Andrea Luiz says. And I want to talk about, we're talking about propagation of thoughts. We know how they propagate in waves, but at what speed? So just think about this. How long does it take for you to get from where you are? Let's say you are somewhere around Baltimore. How long does it take you to get to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil? Well, you got to get the plane, cab, and you got to leave early because you got to go through TSA. So let's just make it 12 hours. Let's just make it 12 hours. It takes 12 hours to get there. How long does it get to get there? How long does it take if you think about going there? If you think that you are there? It doesn't take anything. You're there right away, immediately. Right? Because there's no physical transportation. You don't have to go through the barriers of ponderable matter. Propagation of thoughts, because thoughts do not use physical atoms, physical matter. They use mental atoms, mental matter. They propagate at speeds above the speed of light. So they are tachyonic. Tachyonic means have the speed above the speed of light. And even more interesting, if I tell you, think that you are in Rio de Janeiro, if you've been there, right? It's going to bring to you on that moment the same emotions that you would have if you were physically there. If you had traveled 15 hours to get there, the emotions are the same. And that proves that emotions are not based on material principle. You don't need material principle to feel anything. So let's say, for example, that last time you went to Rio was, let's just say 20 years ago, if you've ever been there. 20 years ago. When you think about it, you have the same emotion of 20 years ago. And you did not move to feel that emotion. You don't need the the material principle. So far, we've seen how thoughts are formed 3 ways, how thoughts are propagated 3 ways, depending on how they are formed. And once they are formed, they will have a range of propagation. They will impact. For now, I'm going to use the word the neighborhood. So they are going to impact the neighborhood. Neighborhood is physical, but it's an analogy. That is called the mental field. So to understand a mental field, think of a campfire. Okay, in the middle of the night. There's absolutely nothing there in the middle of the night. You're in the very dark. Then you light this up. So the people who are very close to that, they will see the light. I'm talking about the light, not the heat, but it applies for both. They will see the light and feel the heat very close. They can pinpoint the location of the source of that because they're very close. As you go further away, you kind of lose that. You can't tell anymore. For example, if you're driving on a highway in the middle of the night, very dark, you don't see anything. When you start getting close to the next city, you can tell there's a city out there. I don't know with what city. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get there, and I can't tell how many miles. But there's a city out there because you are under the influence of, quote, mental field of the city. It is the same thing here. Our thoughts generate a mental field that will be captured by others, just as much as we capture mental fields of all the thoughts laying around. And that's all that is, right? That's all there is, mental fields. So the mental field is going to have more or less impact depending on 2 things: concentration that I put in, and the persistence. How long am I going to sustain that thought? These 2 things impact the mental field. And again, you see, we're not talking about moral. It could be a bad thought. It could be a good thought. It doesn't matter. We're talking about propagation and impact of mental field created by the mental field. So when I say something, I hear what I say. I'm very close to my mouth, so it impacts me too. Similarly, I am part of my mental field. I am part of it. Whatever I propagate with my thoughts, I am the first to capture. It comes to me. And how do I capture that? And how does it impact me? So we have to look into the role of the perispirit. As we know, perispirit is this middleman, let's just put it this way for now, this middleman between the physical body and the spirit. The spirit is not a body, so I'm represented by this image that you see here in yellowish. So the perispirit is right in the middle. When André Luiz is going to explain to us about thoughts and a lot of other things, not only thoughts, but a lot of other things, he's going to say, I can't do this if I don't break this further. So he breaks the perispirit in 3 bodies from left to right: mental body, spiritual body, etheric double. These three guys are called subtle bodies. And you see, the mental body is the closest to the spirit, is the most subtle body of all. And the most physical is the physical body. We want to take a very quick look at these subtle bodies, so we can, go into the impact of thoughts. But we don't want to do a full-blown study on this because it's not the purpose today. So the spirit, as we know, it's the intelligent principle only. There is no matter, no atoms, no anything. It carries our vices and virtues, basically. The mental body is there to do one thing only: produce thoughts and create thought forms. That's the only thing it does. So the mental body is the one who is going to go to the mental atoms and mental protons and all of those things that we saw. It's going to create the thought form. This is like a production line, if you will. If you look here, that's how I position the bodies side by side. So once the spirit carries an emotion, it creates a thought form through its mental body. The mental body sends the information down to the next one in line. The next one in line is called spiritual body. Sometimes André Luiz calls causal body, but for the most part, spiritual body. This is the ledger. This is where our debts and credits in the divine bank are registered. That's why we have to offset things, because they have been recorded, and everything in the universe has to be in balance. So this is the ledger. So let's just put an example here. Let's just think that I don't like what somebody did to me, and I want revenge. Let's just say I want revenge. So I produce a thought form showing my idea of revenge. How I'm going to do this thing. This is going to go down to the spiritual body, and the spiritual body is going to say, this is a debt. So I'm going to write this down on the divine bank. The ledger is going to have a new entry, okay? You want revenge. This goes down to the next one. The next one is the etheric double, which houses the basis of the vital centers. So what we are doing is sending negative, because it's revenge, negative energy down the line. When it gets to the etheric double, it's going to disalign the vital centers. They have recovered themselves, and that's not the study for today, but it's going to go through that. And then the next thing, it goes to the physical body. The physical body is the ultimate expression of the spirit onto the physical world. So it carries all the morality, all our spiritual history, all of that. So what happens exactly when this thought, in this case, I gave an example of revenge. What happens when it gets to the physical body? So we need to take a look at this. When this is combined, when the emanation is combined, you combine all these bodies, each one of them has emanations. The combination of all of them is called the aura. That's what the aura is. The aura is going to carry that negative revenge energy that I'm going to deal with, because I created that. So the aura is this business card for the spiritual world. You see a business card in the physical world. I give you my physical business card, and it's written there, I don't know, NASA engineer, for example, which I'm not, of course. You look at the card, in principle, you're going to believe it. So, and I'm lying to you. In here, such a thing cannot take place, because the thought form doesn't lie. The thought form brings out the truth. So when I present involuntarily, not that I'm going to raise my hand and present my picture, no, but when I produce the thought form, that's what the other spirits are seeing. So it tells me who I am. That's our business card in the spirit world. But anyway, this thing gets to the physical level. Again, we're going to take that example. I want revenge because somebody did something. What happens? We need to go to the cell level to understand this. Each cell, we are 70 trillion cells. So each cell, right? Each cell, we're going to understand what happens. And then you multiply by 70 trillion, because that's what we are. Each cell has digestion. They have to live, so they have to feed themselves. The process is through metabolism, just like the full body. So the metabolism of a cell takes two things in. First, glucose. Second, oxygen. They go into the cell in a very specific organelle. Organelles are small organs. For example, when you eat something, you're using organs from your digestive system. Same thing here. So these things are taken into the mitochondria. A mitochondrion is the organelle inside the cell responsible for metabolism. Cells have hundreds of these, where metabolism is more intense, which is on the liver and on the pulmonary areas. We have more than 1,000 mitochondria per cell. Anyway, glucose comes in, oxygen comes in, and it generates energy. Generates energy for the body to use, and CO2 as a byproduct. It sounds simple. And then, everybody's happy. We know about it. Science tells us this is what it is. But then André Luiz says, you're right, but you're missing something. And this is something that he says we are missing. It's in evolution in two worlds. Through the mitochondria, which can be seen as accumulation of spiritual energy in the form of granules that ensure cellular activity, right? So through the mitochondria, the mind transmits to the body, to which it is adjusted during incarnation, all of its happy or unhappy states, harmonizing or disturbing the cycles of metabolism. This is serious because now it's not only glucose and oxygen. There's something else that has to be taken into consideration, which is the mental state. So it's almost like this. The mitochondria receives glucose, receives oxygen. Before it transforms everything in energy, it will stop and say, stop. You up there, what's the mental state? When the answer is revenge, the energy generated is going to carry traces of revenge. If the state is charity, I did beautiful charity work today. I'm really, feeling grand today. The energy generated is going to carry that. And that goes throughout 70 trillion cells of our bodies. So when somebody does something to us that we don't like, let's just say, for example, that on a Friday, you had an argument with your boss and it didn't end well, and you go home on Friday evening and you said, it's not the first time this has been happening. I can't take this anymore. I'm going to go in on Monday morning and I'm going to tell him this and that, and and you plan it out, and you have a plan A and a plan B of how you're going to, take this situation, all this rage inside on Monday morning. But it's Friday evening, right? So you're gonna feel this. You're gonna do this to your 70 trillion cells in yourself for 48 hours. More, right? 48 hours would be Sunday night. So for 50 some hours until you get to your boss and do this. Meanwhile, while you are going through this on your Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, he is home with his family, very happy with the kids, watching football, going to the movies, driving around the neighborhood, walking the dog, whatever it is, very happy. Not a single cell of his body is being impacted by this. The only thing being impacted is myself. And it all starts with the thought. Thought is the first responder of our emotions. We're speaking about André Luiz, which is 50 years after Kardec, or maybe some of the books are 80 years after Kardec. Look at this phrase, from the codification heaven and hell. The spirit is the artisan of the body, which is molded by, so to speak, in the fashion of the spirit's needs and the manifestation of its tendencies. So the spirit is going to build the body according to what it needs to manifest and its tendencies. And it continues. As a natural consequence of this principle, the spirit's moral dispositions should modify the qualities of the blood, making it more active or less so, thereby causing more abundant or less abundant secretions of bile and other fluids. This is not André Luiz. This is Allan Kardec, Spiritist codification, the basic literature for everything else. So in the codification, Allan Kardec is already telling us the same thing that André Luiz is telling us. Of course, the level of detail is not the same, obviously. The names are not the same because science, from Kardec to André Luiz learned a lot more. We have a lot of new names and much better knowledge. But the basic concept and the idea is the same. So you see, this is treated in Spiritism at its very core by Allan Kardec, explaining how our emotions become thoughts, which propagate inside ourselves to our 70 trillion cells. If it's a good thought, great. If it's not a good thought, we're going to suffer. Who else suffers with us? Nobody. Guys, thank you very much. Hopefully we could convey the message of the study. We could make you understand what all of this is trying to tell us. And if there are any questions or any comments or suggestions, we'll be here for it. Thanks so much.
Luis, thank you so much for this amazing explanation. One of the things that I always get from your, and we discussed this with Daniel some time ago, is the way you explain as well. It makes it much easier. And again, I knew that this is a super, or I don't, a lack of, I have a lack of words in terms of how to describe this, the idea about thoughts and emotions, right? Especially our thoughts. And when Spiritism comes and talks about this, it brings the foundation of, we are what we think, right? So and so happens, based on what we think, based on how we behave as well. So I am so happy that you brought this topic. In the, it's also an amazing opportunity for us to remind us that, we need to study more, right? You mentioned two books, The Mechanism of Mediumship, right?
Right.
The other one was I just want to remind everyone, the
Evolution in Two Worlds.
Right.
And I also mentioned this one here, The Soul of Matter by Dr. Marlene Nobre.
Thank you. And I also wanted to just remind everyone about these three books, right? They're not easy. It's something, and then I should say, at least for me,
no, they're very deep scientifically. Yeah,
they're very deep. Yes, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't challenge ourselves and say, "Let me read it," right? And if I get stuck in one chapter for 2 or 3 months, it's okay. It's perfectly fine. Call Luis. Call Luis if you have questions. But I'm glad that you brought this, because they are very important in our lives as well, and it makes a difference. And I think you nailed the head as well in terms of how this applies to us, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we lose, a weekend thinking about something that is not important. Many of us, and again, I bring myself out there. It's beyond a weekend. It's a month, 2 months. It's an entire life where we are just wasting our time and creating things that is not conducive to us and to others.
Absolutely. Yeah, so, we see people, and things happen when you were, a kid, and you're still bringing it every day in your life. So
in your life. And thank you. And that goes to show on how much we are in control of all of this. And it's very easy for us, and we still actually do, right? We put the blame into, oh, this happened to me. Well, guess what? We are in control of our thoughts or our emotions. Easy to say,
yeah,
we understand, but definitely we are in control of it. So I'll ask Daniel to bring the questions and the comments that we have here. And Kirsten asks, Luis, it feels relatively easy to understand how our thoughts work, but it's incredibly challenging to control
yeah.
our thoughts. We are upset. What are some ways to mitigate this challenge?
Yeah, it is difficult. Of course, it is. The more we try to do, of course, it's a training process. It's a training process. Uh, I think the first step, because I was a very irritated person until my maybe 16, 17 years old. I would just, blow everything at all costs. And one day I got tired of it. Really, I got, oh my God, I'm not going to do this again. I just got tired. To get tired is a turning point. And to get tired, you have to tell yourself, how many times have I done this? And one day you're going to, and that's how I started. Like I said, oh my God, every time I see this person, I go through the same thing. Every time I go to that location, I see the same thing. So you get tired. You have to perceive that you're getting tired. That's how I would suggest to do it. So we have to kind of monitor how many times we are, making it happen. And then there's going to be a point where we can't take that anymore. That's it. I'm going to do something else.
Luis, just a follow-up question here with on what you said here, because there are two things that you said at the beginning before I asked the question. Something happened to me in the on my childhood, and I keep thinking about it. Now, answering Kirsten questions, you said that something that you brought, and thank you for exposing yourself, that you brought, when you're young. Um, if What about for those who realize what you just said, but they don't have any connection with something that happened in this lifetime? Could this come from another life?
Of course, because this is emotion. That's not thought. That's emotion that, comes up. The situation that we go through, they will make the emotion come up, but the emotion is there. It's hidden there somewhere. The problems that we have is when it comes up, we don't control it. I think that was the core of the question. And yeah, for me, what I suggested to myself, and it worked for me, it did work for me, was this: how many times have I done this? And and I could test myself. For example, there were some people that I didn't like at the time, or some places that I had to go with these people, and I was trying to avoid, because I didn't want to, just feel bad and all over again. And then one day I said, no, I'm going to go there, but with a different mindset. I'm going to try it. First day is difficult. I'm going to try it, a different mindset. So that's how we have to start. You have to expose yourself to the situation. If you don't expose yourself to the situation, you're not training. If you're not training, you're not getting better.
Thank you. Thank you. No pain, no gain.
Yeah, yeah.
In a nice way, obviously. We don't want to put anybody through a situation where they don't feel at ease, or at least say comfortable enough, right? I think you have to give yourself, put yourself in situations to certain levels, right? Until you would master. But thank you. Next question, Daniel. Paula is saying, amazingly great and practically helpful talk.
Thank you.
As meditation requires lots of concentration, why isn't it a short wave?
No, meditation is a constant. It's a medium wave, like we said, because it's something that we concentrate some, but it's not something that if you get to the point when you are meditating that you completely, you know, deliver yourself, or you make it 100% of the situation, yes, it will be a short wave. Most of the meditation that we do in our days, that was what André Luiz says in the book, going throughout the regular day, You can stop and think at times, oh, let me meditate a little bit here, but it won't be anything strong. If it becomes a very strong emotion, yes, it will be a short wave. It's just the way that he puts in the book. He gives examples where it is a medium wave.
Thank you for the clarification. And Pollock also asks, as the creator's thought is pure and the human ponders it, at what point does it flip to negative?
When your emotions, when the spirit creates the thought form, it becomes negative because you see the creator provides the basics for us to create the thought. It's like I can give you, for example, a box of Lego blocks.
Mhm.
You take the Lego blocks, and I'm expecting you to do a little house, and you do a monster, for example, or you do something very bad. It's still you doing it. What was provided to you was provided with no sense of direction per se, not negative or positive, because morality comes from you, doesn't come from God. God gives you, he lays out everything, gives you, creates us simple and ignorant, and we're gonna go through this. And then at times, yeah, we're gonna do negative things. A lot of times we do negative things. We carry over for several lifetimes, one after the other, never work on that because it's difficult to change. But it's all us. We create the negative things.
Would you say it would be more like what we do with water, for example? One can make coffee, one can make tea.
Mhm.
It depends what kind of imprinting we put on that element.
Yeah, that's why he says we are co-creators. We take something already created and modify it. We don't create from scratch. We can't do that. So what we receive, the basis that we receive, the to co-create are clean always. Like she says, it's all good. Now, what I do with that. Yeah, like you said, with the water, I can make poison out of water if I want to.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Eniasco says, "Hi, Luis. How the emotion, say revenge, which is not of a material principle, will affect the discarnated spirit?"
Well, discarnated spirits are living in the imponderable matter world. They are still in the related to matter. They have perispirits. Perispirit is matter. They think. Thought is matter. So yeah, you will impact them. When I say revenge is not part of the material principle, it doesn't need the material principle to be exposed by the spirit. But when the spirit wants revenge, it's going to produce thought forms. And thought forms use the material principle, and it will affect other people because of its mental field. Thought forms will create the mental field with a certain range, and it's going to impact others. They will be subject to my mental field, and they will receive it. What they do with that,
Mm.
it's on them. I can receive a lot of negative energy and just don't care.
So, if I may add a follow-up question here, since we were on this leg of
Mhm.
information that you just brought, I would like to explore a little bit on this idea of because your talk is very bringing us to the responsibility that we are in charge, right? And I think
Yeah.
that is amazing. And I think that if we were to think a little bit more like this, we would be way ahead of where we are right now. But the truth of the matter is that there is a we are affected, right? And
Mhm.
what would you say? And I think you already answered at the beginning with Kirsten, but where are we? Where should be in terms of what are we receiving, right? How are we are being bombarded with all the craziness nowadays, and what one needs to do in order for us to be a little bit more in control, or let's say be more reactive than, I'm sorry, active than reactive.
Yeah, I think it had to do with the focus that we put in. It's like watching TV, right? There's all sorts of channels. If I turn into the news channels and I complain that the news are negative, why am I watching it? Why don't I just move to another channel that is all happy and whatever it is? So I think that's part of the problem with us because of the level of development that we are in. We're still very attached to things of the past. So we keep watching the news channel and complain about the news for day after day after day after day. We never get to, oh, let me change channels tonight. We don't do this very easily. And I think it goes along the same way. So we are bombarded with negative stuff, but we don't do anything not to pay attention. We don't put any filters on it. So we need to, I think, look at this. I'm getting bombarded with negative stuff. Where is it coming from? If it's coming from TV news, I can change the channel. If it comes from that person that I meet every day, I might not want to be close to that person all the time. It is my colleagues in a bar that I go every night. I might not want to go to the bar anymore. You see, the action has to come from us. We are the ones to walk away from what makes us a target for negative energy.
Thank you. Thank you. And you know, it's a great reminder to all of us because sometimes we make a big deal out of it, but bottom line is, what are we doing with it? I mean, and sometimes, you know, you presented something really interesting at the beginning where, okay, you acknowledge that there is a problem. Sometimes we acknowledge that there is a problem. We don't feel well, but yet we don't do anything, right? So it's like, you know, stay on the same. So thank you for that. And that's,
No,
you know,
no. There's situations, for example, that we feel bad for some reason, clinically speaking, physically speaking. We go to the doctor gives us a medicine, and we say, I'm not going to take it. Okay, it's a choice. But you can't complain about the doctor. You can't go to your neighbor and say, don't go to that doctor because he's awful.
right.
You see.
The problem was presented, was shown, clinically proven,
Yeah.
but we still don't do it. That is true. That is true. Then, do we have anything else that we have to do? All right, and then Paula comes up again and says, "How does a highly sensitive person stay grounded when in the mental field of the marketplace?"
Focus. It's very complicated for mediums to deal with that. I heard somebody say this the other day. It was a long time ago, actually. He said this: when you're a medium and you are at the Spiritist Center, you're doing something that is very powerful. You're carrying through you a lot of negative energy because that's the bad spirits coming in, the suffering spirits coming in to, participate and be, you know, go through their consolation. But you, as a medium, you're going through a tremendous negative energy. Of course, you are protected and so and so and so. Now, if you practice medicine at home, not medicine, mediumship, if you practice mediumship at home, that's a whole different story because you're going to be part of that energy yourself because there's no protection, not necessarily. So you're going to align and you're going to be part of the energy. It's like a river flows through and you get into the water, you're going to get it's going to take you away. So for the medium, I think that's the biggest training. That's the biggest challenge for the medium. Train how to shut down the doors of mediumship when you're not at the center. Because at home, you don't really want to practice mediumship because it's dangerous. It could be disaster depending on the situations. I'm not saying it's easy, but that's what we need to do. Shut down mediumship, if you will, or at least be very, very aware of. Not try to open your pineal gland to connections, nothing like this, because we get a lot of stuff.
Thank you. Thank you. And then we move on. There is one more, and this is from Daniel. It is possible a thought reaches a planet that is outside of our solar system, or is it limited to our planet only?
Okay, thoughts, they propagate at the speed more than the speed of the light. If you were able to communicate with an astronaut on the moon, then propagation exists. What's different is this, I think. This is my opinion. The wave itself is going to get to another planet. If it's, technically you could. The wave itself. Now the wave has a meaning. It brings a meaning. For example, when you turn into radio station 100, okay, megahertz, they are playing samba, okay? If you put a meter, it's called oscilloscope. If you put a meter, what you're gonna detect is, sometimes we see that on the TV, waves doing like this on a screen, a bunch of waves doing like this on a screen. When you look at that, you can't tell what the content is. You cannot tell if it's a person speaking at the radio station, if it's music playing, if it's an ad. You can't tell. It has to be decoded. The radio itself decodes that, and then you listen to whatever, music and so on and so on. So there's an encoding at the beginning of the transmission and a decoding on the reception side. We would have to have a decoding on another planet that matches the encoding here. And not necessarily that's going to happen, because the planetary fluids are different. So the imponderable matter of another planet is not the same as ours. So not necessarily it would be decoded on the other side. This is my personal opinion, based on science, because I'm a techie. So,
But bringing back to us, thank you, Luis. But bringing back to us, since you use this, this analogy of the radio, right? We have, we are the senders, so we're sending a message, and we are also the receiving party. So we do have the decoder, right? When
we do. At home, we have the radio at home. That's the decoder.
Right.
The radio station has the encoder
inside of us.
No. The radio station. The radio.
No, I got you. But I'm talking about bringing back to the exchange of feelings or emotions that we are doing here in our psychosphere and planet Earth.
Yeah, but when it gets to the other planetary fluid, I don't know if that wave is still alive with the same content on the other planetary fluid, because now it's matter. Thought is matter.
Gotcha.
You see, you created some. Maybe it's something like this. You're talking to somebody on the phone. The guy calls you from Germany, but he speaks in German. So, the information comes through, but you can't decode. And you can't decode because you don't have the same, the proper decoder to listen to understand what he's saying. You listen to him, but you do not understand what he's saying. When you go from planetary fluid to planetary fluid, the same thing can happen. It could get there, but it cannot be understood because it was formed, the thought was formed using our planetary fluid, imponderable matter, which not necessarily is the same on the other side.
Okay. Danny, do we have any? We have one comment, and then also we have a question here from someone at the SSSB. And Fabiola Mello says, we must feed our mental body with the same regularity, or even more than we feed our physical bodies. Thanks, especially about the mitochondrial food, glucose, oxygen, good thoughts, emotions.
Yeah.
Very good, Fabiola. That is true. Yes. I don't know if you have any comment there.
No, and it's not only that. Depends on the mental state.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Antonio, go ahead. No, but since you would have to speak over here, you can say, is it long or?
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Okay.
So he's talking about answering Daniel's question about the communication between planets.
Okay.
I was watching a documentary, and two people had gave a testimony of being communicating with another planet through meditation.
Okay.
So they were able to kind of go to the other side, but just what I understood is spiritually they stayed at home, but spiritually, or I don't know, they went to another dimension.
So Antonia here at the SSB, she's commenting again on Daniel's question that she was actually watched a documentary where two individuals, they were able to, through meditation, to connect with another planet, and they were able to communicate or go through another dimension,
Even their body were.
even though the body were, stayed at home. So she's just making a comment and an
No,
observation.
not a dimension or not a planet? Not a dimension in
Dimension
here.
or planet.
No, where they were, where these beings were, they're mentally traveled to their place, but their body were.
Right, but
Yeah.
is it another dimension or is another planet? Hit the question.
Another planet.
Another planet.
Yeah, so I don't have any information on that. How do we know that? You see, we have in the codification itself, in the Spiritist Review, we have 3 instances where spirits from other planets, not physically, but in perispirit, they have to be here. They go to the mediumistic session where Kardec is to give us information about Jupiter, another one, Venus, Jupiter twice, and then Venus. But they have to somehow be in the planetary fluid to be able to communicate. So they had to have some sort of perispirit here to be able to do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't understand, because we can only understand the mental matter of our planetary fluid.
Interesting. Okay.
And he says, and he starts doing this, I am here with you in the room. He starts by saying that.
So one we would be able, based on this, which makes sense in terms of our connection with higher beings, that they would have to be somehow to a proximity in terms in being in this let's say fluidic level that in fact has a connection with us.
Yeah.
In order to communicate, in order to carry on, some exchange of thoughts and
right. Yeah, you see, mediumship is spirit against perispirit.
Okay.
Both perispirits, the medium and the communicating spirits, they expand, but they kind of overlap, if that's the right word. They kind of overlap, and that's why they can communicate.
Okay. Daniel, is this the last one, or any more comments? So that is everything, Luis. I thank you for your time again, and sharing this with us. A lot of food for thoughts. Thanks for the teachings in terms of even saying go read these books, right? I mean, it really draws us into these amazing learning. So we would like to give you a couple more minutes so you can make your final comments, and I bring your final thoughts here, and so we can bid farewell. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me say this. You're talking about the books. Yeah, the basis for study today is this book here, The Mechanics of Mediumship. It's a very difficult book for 2 reasons. It's very technical, and the first, I think, 8 chapters, he talks, you see, this is written in 1939, I think it is. At the time, we had no idea of what quantum physics was going to be, what physics was going to know, what chemistry was going to be available to find out. So he had to use a lot of analogies to explain what he was going to explain. The best we had was electricity and magnetism, which today are so basic, it's so basic. It's, kids study this in early school. So he has to use a lot of terms, explain electricity, how things work inside the electrical equipment. And people who are not technical, they give up. And that has to be respected. They give up because it's difficult. So they read 3 chapters and never go back to the book. But there are things on the book that do not depend on these 3 chapters. For example, the last 2 chapters in the book are about prayer, and they do not depend on the first 8. The chapter that talks about this here is also one of the chapters that do not require you to read anything prior or know everything prior in details. I'm not saying it's easy. It still has a language, a technical language, but it's more achievable than if you try to read in sequence. You can skip and go directly to those chapters. And I think it's studying is the key to everything. First of all, this is very clear by Allan Kardec and André Luiz. It all starts with a thought. That's it. That's how the spirit, which is the intelligent principle, makes its incursion into the matter through thought. That's it. So anything spirit in the material world starts with a thought. Comes from the mental body, goes down, spiritual body, etheric doubling. It hits us, really, it hits us on the physical body with good things or bad things. Our cells are going to suffer or live longer. It's all up to us. Negative thoughts will make the double etheric use a lot of vital fluid to realign the chakras. So by using more vital fluid than necessary, we reduce the time that we have to live on Earth. So think about thinking. You know? Think about what you're thinking.
Thank you, then, Luis, for this reminder. To think about thinking, right? What am I thinking, and why? How can I change? And the energy. I think you reminded us of something really interesting, which is about the energy as well. So, with that in mind, let us use our energy in the positive way, the positive side of life, which is to give thanks for this opportunity that we had. And as we are praying, consider this as well our um, spiritual passes to all of us here at the SSB, all of us at home whom we're connected with. We thank you, dear Lord, for this amazing moment that we had, this great insight and learning that we had today. We ask, dear Lord, that you guide the mind and heart of our dear friend Luiz Lima, who spent this hour, a little over an hour with us. A little short time compared to what he has utilized to prepare this talk. The many hours of work, study, the energy that he put forth to come